Welcome back, everyone. Ready for another deep dive? Today, we're taking a closer look at Jack Ruby, the man who shot Lee Harvey Oswald.
Yeah, this one's a doozy. I mean, everyone knows Ruby killed Oswald, but this deep dive is going to try to unravel some of his connections and activities before, during, and after the assassination.
Exactly, because there are a lot of unanswered questions swirling around this guy and his potential ties to a larger conspiracy.
Right. And to guide us through this labyrinth of intrigue, we're going to be looking at an excerpt from The Third Decade, which is a journal dedicated to exploring, well, all things JFK assassination.
Perfect. So should we jump right in?
Let's do it. The author of this piece really highlights a few areas that they believe deserve another look, and one of the biggest ones is the fact that investigators seem to miss some key opportunities to really dig into Ruby's world.
Like what?
Well, they went through his apartment, his car, but his offices, like the one at the Carousel Club and the Vegas Club, seem to have been largely overlooked.
Huh? That's strange, right? You'd think those would be prime locations to search for clues.
Yeah, and it gets even more suspicious because after the Carousel Club closed down, a safe was stolen from Ruby's office there. Someone went to a lot of trouble to get their hands on whatever was inside.
Okay, now that's a major red flag. What was in that safe? And why would someone want to keep it hidden? Could this point to Ruby being involved in something much bigger?
It's definitely a question worth considering. And then there's this mysterious phone number that pops up in the files of evidence, that massive collection of documents related to the assassination investigation.
Right, I've heard of those.
Well, this number was listed under a name, David Schroll, but the address linked to it was associated with Jack Ruby.
So it was like a burner phone or something. What was it used for?
It's unclear. Was it a way for Ruby to communicate with potential co-conspirators? The author seems to think so.
Okay, well, my conspiracy senses are definitely tingling now.
Mine too. And speaking of interesting connections, we need to talk about the women who worked at Ruby's Carousel Club.
The strippers.
Yeah, the strippers. The author focuses on 4 of them whose actions around the time of the assassination really raised some eyebrows.
Oh, this is getting good. Lay it on me. Who are these women?
Well, we've got Nancy Powell, Kay Coleman, Joyce McDonald, and Karen Carlin. Each of their stories has its own twists and turns.
All right, let's start with Nancy Powell. What's the deal with her trip to Dallas with a guy named Pete DeVotry on November 22nd?
Right. And they even ended up at Parkland Hospital just minutes after Kennedy's death was announced.
Whoa, that's quite a coincidence.
And that telegram Ruby sent to Powell just a week before the assassination?
Uh-huh.
Well, it looks a lot like the one he sent to Karen Carlin right before shooting Oswald.
Seriously? Okay, that's way too coincidental to ignore.
Right. And it gets even weirder. Powell later moved to Oklahoma City and ended up working at a club owned by a known Ruby associate, along with another former Ruby stripper.
Wow, so everyone's connected in some way. It's like a spider web of intrigue.
You got it. Now on to Kay Coleman. Her alibi for the afternoon of the assassination is pretty shaky. She said she was at home with her kids, but Dallas schools were open that day.
So where was she really? And why'd she suddenly decide to quit stripping right after the assassination? It's like she's trying to distance herself from Ruby and everything that was going down.
Her actions definitely raised some questions, and just like Nancy Powell, she also ended up in Oklahoma City, working at that same club owned by Ruby's associate.
Starting to see a pattern here.
Yeah, me too. Okay, now we've got Joyce McDonald. She was super close to Ruby. Some even said she was pregnant with his kid.
Wow.
And get this, she also went to Parkland Hospital on November 22nd, separate from Ruby and Powell.
Okay, that's a lot of coincidences piling up.
It is. Later that evening, she bumped into Ruby and gave him this dramatic speech about understanding his grief, as a mother.
Wait a minute, wasn't there another moment like that? With Olsen and Coleman comforting Ruby?
Yeah, you're right. It's almost like those encounters were staged to make Ruby look sympathetic.
That's a really good point. Like, they were trying to control how the public viewed him before he was even arrested.
Exactly. And speaking of arrests, McDonald herself was arrested a little while after the assassination.
Really? What for?
Dancing with a man in a cafe without a dance license.
Seems a bit harsh for something so minor.
Yeah, possibly a way to harass her, maybe try to scare her into keeping quiet. Remember, she lived close to some people who witnessed the Tippit shooting, so she might have known something important.
Oh man, this is getting deep. Okay, so what about Karen Carlin? What's her story?
Well, buckle up because this one's a doozy. She first met Ruby in a pretty strange way. He and another guy tossed a business card at her from a Cadillac.
You're kidding.
Nope. Then, on November 23rd, She and her husband hitched a ride to Dallas with, you guessed it, Nancy Powell. They were hoping to work at the Carousel Club.
So they meet with Ruby.
They do, and he gives them some money. It's like he was taking care of his people.
Okay, but where's the doozy part you mentioned?
Well, Carlin supposedly called Ruby on the morning of November 24th, just hours before he shot Oswald. Some folks think this call is what made Ruby go downtown, which led to the whole Oswald thing.
So that phone call could have been the catalyst.
Maybe, but here's the kicker. Early reports don't even mention this phone call. Ruby's roommate, George Senator, and the FBI gave conflicting stories about it.
Something's not adding up.
Right. Some have even suggested the call never happened, that it was made up to cover something up.
Like what? That the shooting wasn't a spur-of-the-moment thing, but planned?
It's a possibility. And then there's the fact that Carlin was harassed like crazy after the assassination. Someone broke into her jail cell. She was under constant police watch. A former boss even threatened her.
Jeez, these women went through a lot. Do you think they knew too much? Were they considered a threat to someone involved in the assassination?
It's possible. And unfortunately, Carlin's story ends on a pretty sad note. She vanished under mysterious circumstances, and some folks believe her disappearance might be linked to the assassination.
That's awful. It's like everyone connected to this event got swept up in something much bigger than themselves.
Yeah, it's a really tragic story, and it makes you wonder just how many others connected to Ruby might have been silenced or at least intimidated.
It's a chilling thought.
Yeah.
And this web of intrigue, well, it doesn't end with the strippers. The author dives into some of Ruby's other associates.
Oh, yeah, each with their own set of, let's say, peculiarities and suspicious activities.
Sounds like we're about to meet some more interesting characters.
Oh, absolutely. One that stands out is George Senator. Ruby's roommate, right?
Yeah.
He kind of seemed to play the role of alibi provider, backing up Ruby's claims of, erratic behavior before Oswald was killed.
Okay, interesting.
And get this, Senator was arrested soon after the assassination.
Oh, really? So was that to keep him quiet? Maybe an intimidation tactic?
It definitely adds another layer of suspicion, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And then there's Lawrence Myers, a businessman from Chicago who often met with Ruby during his Dallas trips. And guess what? He and his brother just happened to be in Dallas the weekend of the assassination.
Seriously, another coincidence. At this point, I'm starting to think coincidences are pretty rare in this story.
Right. What were they meeting about? Was it all business or something more? And then there's that strange $200 transaction between Myers and Joyce McDonald. Remember her?
Yeah.
The stories about that money are all over the place, super conflicting. Some even suggest it might be tied to a visit Ruby made to the assistant district attorney's office the day before Kennedy was shot.
Wow, hold on. You're talking about William Alexander.
All right.
Yeah. The guy who had a courtesy card for Ruby's Carousel Club.
Yeah.
The kind that basically means free drinks and entertainment.
That's the one.
So every time we turn over a rock, it seems like we find another link back to Ruby.
It really is fascinating, isn't it? Then there's Ralph Paul, Ruby's business partner, also loaned him money a lot. After the assassination, he had some shady-sounding phone calls with Ruby. One supposedly involved Paul talking about a gun and calling Ruby crazy.
And then Paul basically went into hiding when he found out Ruby shot Oswald, right? Even dodged the FBI for a couple of days.
Exactly. Doesn't seem like the actions of someone with nothing to hide, right?
Not at all. It's like everyone in Ruby's circle was acting pretty weird after the assassination. Like Larry Crafford, for example. He did odd jobs for Ruby at the Carousel Club. Even went with Ruby and Senator on that odd photo mission in the early hours of Saturday the 23rd.
Ah, yes. The one where they supposedly took photos of buildings and storefronts.
That's the one. What was that all about? Another detail that just adds to the mystery surrounding Ruby.
Absolutely. And then right after that weird outing, Crafford just vanishes from Dallas. Poof. Gone. After a big fight with Ruby.
Sounds suspicious.
The FBI eventually tracked him down in Michigan, living with his cousin, Cliff Roberts.
Hold on, wait a minute. Didn't you say earlier that Cliff Roberts was one of the investigators hired by General Walker to tail William Duff, the guy suspected of trying to kill Walker?
Yeah, that's right.
And Cliff Roberts is the cousin of Crafford, Ruby's handyman. It's like all these connections are just spiraling outwards.
It's quite a web, isn't it? And this is where things get even more interesting. The author suggests that Ruby's network, well, it might have gone beyond just his immediate associates.
You mean like reaching into the Dallas police?
Yeah.
And the local right-wing folks, those connected to General Walker?
You got it.
Okay, now we're getting into some serious conspiracy territory. But let's back up a bit. We know Ruby was a self-proclaimed police buff, right? loved to befriend and support police officers.
Yeah, and that's important because it makes you question his relationships with them. Was it just friendly admiration? Or was there something deeper going on, something maybe even corrupt?
Good question. And the author points out that a lot of the officers involved in Oswald's arrest and even the assassination investigation, well, they had personal connections to Ruby.
A lot of connections. For example, Gerald Hill, he bragged about getting free drinks at the Carousel Club. Roy Hawkins, another officer, also had a courtesy card for the club. And remember Bob Carroll? He apparently met with Ruby in his office just a few days before Kennedy was killed.
And then there's J.B. Tony, who arrested Ruby once, but then, strangely, urged the victim to drop the charges.
Yeah, that one's a head-scratcher. It seems like Ruby had friends in high places within the Dallas police.
And don't forget about William Alexander, the assistant DA we talked about earlier. He also had a courtesy card for Ruby's club and met with him right before the assassination.
It's like a who's who of the Dallas PD had some connection to Jack Ruby.
Makes you wonder if it was just Ruby being well-connected or if something more was going on.
Right. And the author's research, well, it brings up even more questions when we look at the possible connections between Ruby and General Walker. Less direct than his police ties, but just as interesting.
Okay, remind me about General Walker again. Right-wing figure, right. How does he fit into all of this?
Well, Walker was the target of a sniper attack back in April of '63. The Warren Commission said Oswald was behind it, but some evidence suggests another man, William Duff, might have been involved.
Wait, William Duff? The guy Walker hired Cliff Roberts to follow. And Cliff Roberts is the cousin of Larry Crafford, Ruby's handyman who disappeared from Dallas.
That's right.
Man, these connections are mind-blowing.
And there are even more threads that could link Ruby to Walker, like William Duff claiming that Ruby had visited Walker's home several times.
Wow, seriously? If that's true, that suggests a whole other level of connection between them. What could they have been talking about? Was there some kind of collaboration happening?
Those are questions that need answers. And then there's Joe Campisi, a restaurant owner connected to both Ruby and Walker. He might have been a go-between for them.
It's like we're piecing together a giant puzzle, and every new piece just raises more questions.
Exactly. And let's not forget about Ralph Paul, Ruby's business partner, who might have been funneling money from Walker to Ruby.
So what does it all mean? Was Ruby just a pawn in some bigger game? Used by powerful people to shut Oswald up?
It's a theory worth considering. The more we learn about Ruby's world, the more we realize that the official story might just be the tip of the iceberg.
It's a lot to take in. This deep dive is definitely going to keep me thinking for a while. It's amazing how even after all this time, the Kennedy assassination still raises so many questions and theories.
And that's exactly why we need to keep asking those questions. Keep searching for the truth, no matter how hard it is to find.
I feel like we've stepped into one of those classic film noir movies. You know, it's like we're surrounded by shadows and secrets, and everyone's got something to hide.
Yeah, you said it. And right smack in the middle of it all, there's Jack Ruby, a man who knew everyone was everywhere. So was he just some small-time club owner who stumbled into this whole mess, or was he a key part of a bigger conspiracy?
Man, it's getting hard to tell what's real and what's not. The more we dig, the more confusing it gets. Feels like we've just scratched the surface.
Well, that's how these complex events go, right? There's always more to discover, more connections to follow. This deep dive definitely makes you question the official story and shows us that the Kennedy assassination is still shrouded in mystery.
It all comes back to Jack Ruby. If he hadn't killed Oswald, where would we be now? Could Oswald have spoken up, maybe revealed something that would have changed everything?
It's a question we'll never have the answer to. But one thing's for sure, Ruby's actions had a huge impact on the investigation, shaped how people saw the Kennedy assassination for years to come.
Imagine if Oswald had lived. Maybe we'd see the events of that day in Dallas totally differently. Maybe the Warren Commission's findings would have been different. Maybe people wouldn't be so suspicious of the official story.
It's interesting to think about, isn't it? But we can't change the past. All we can do is keep looking at the evidence, explore different theories, and try to piece together the truth.
It's been a wild ride, this deep dive. So many twists and turns. I've definitely learned a lot. But I also have even more questions now than when we started.
Well, that's not a bad thing. Being curious is what pushes us to learn and understand, to challenge what we think we know, and dig deeper into the mysteries around us.
So what's the big takeaway for our listeners? What do we want them to remember from this look into Jack Ruby's world?
I think the most important thing is this. Don't be afraid to question the official story. Don't settle for simple answers. Keep digging, keep exploring, and keep an open mind.
That's great advice. And who knows, maybe one of our listeners will be the one to uncover the piece of evidence that finally solves the Kennedy assassination. Until then, the mystery lives on.